Hello, yes, welcome to this week's 5y5. We talk all things 5 yards on this podcast and or YouTube video. Welcome however you're joining us. We are Ali Maxwell and George Ellick, 5 yards ambassadors, trying to keep our head above water with so much going on in the Champions League, European top divisions and the EFL as well. Of course, 5 yards is well represented with players from all over the world on site. George, how are you getting on? Welcome to another week of 5y5.
I'm good, mate. Very excited to be here alongside you. Last week when we spoke, it was a special Ligue 1 episode and we could speak a bit of French to each other, un petit peu de français. But today it is a special episode and I can't speak their language because I'm not one.
Absolutely.
It's goalkeepers. So today we're going to be talking about 4 goalkeepers. I'm going to talk about a player later on who I spent today watching YouTube compilations with an R&B track over the top of it in order to talk about him for us. But yeah, you had a special guest on today to talk about the men between the sticks.
I think YouTube compilations with thumping music is something that anyone who scouts, both full-time or in an amateur sense, in a 5-yard sense, is very, very aware of. I hope it was a good track. Sometimes they are a little bit iffy, aren't they? Well, I look forward to hearing who you're going to talk about later on the 5x5. But as you say, a goalkeeper special. Neither of us, sadly, speak the language of goalkeepers, but we do have someone in the 5 yards team who very much does. James Mayley, who is a 5Y scout, is also a UEFA licence holder and a goalkeeper coach and knows a lot about goalkeepers across the world. So with a few goalkeepers heading up on site this week, we're going to pick James's brain and he's going to replace you, sadly, for the next 15 minutes or so. Yes, that's right. We're making good use of our 5Y experts, the scouts, analysts who rate the players, who predict their futures just like we who play the game do, and ultimately come up with the price that you see on 5 yards. And it's James Mayley who is well placed to talk about goalkeepers. There are not many experts in this field, I would suggest, in the media. Thankfully, James is one and he is ours. So, James, how are you doing? Welcome to 5y5.
No, thanks for having me on, Ali, and thank you for describing me as an expert. I'm not sure I go quite that far, but I'll do my best on this one.
Well, I suppose we will be the judge of that over the next 10 minutes or so. Look, it's great timing, James, to talk to you because there are quite a few goalies going up on 5 yards this week. And I mean, very, very understandably, they are not the sexiest 5 yards prospects. If you look at the breakdown of all the players on 5 yards and how, what percentage of them have been bought, then you won't see many goalkeepers in there. But that doesn't mean that they are not worth thinking about because they can make performance pay through wins in games that they start. It's unlikely they're going to score or assist. But, like anything, that doesn't mean that if you think you can predict a goalkeeper's pathway better than the 5 yard scouts, such as yourself, then there's no reason to say why they couldn't be a good player to add to your squad and make money on in the long term. So we're going to talk about a few that have gone up, all England based, but not all English, because we're going to start with Robert Sanchez of Brighton and Spain. Yesterday, Tuesday, Robert Sanchez was called up to the Spanish national team, and it was a remarkable thing, really, because this is someone that we have followed closely. You will have done as well, on loan in League 2 with Forest Green 2 seasons ago, and on loan in League 1 with Rochdale last season, breaking into the Brighton side, of course, this season after Matt Ryan's poor form, and not looking back. So it was your job to price up Robert Sanchez, to work everything out, and I can imagine that must have been quite difficult because of not only his skill set, but also what's happened in the last few months.
Yeah, no, Sanchez was probably the hardest one I had to price this week for reasons we'll go on to now. But yeah, so start off, he's keeper, just turned 23, so still a young age, really good age to be playing in the Premier League. 6'6", really big, powerful keeper. But the great thing about Sanchez, and the thing that makes me think this guy could explode, is he's not just 6'6", he's really athletic as well. Often when keepers are coming for crosses, who are bigger, they struggle to get off the ground. He can drive, he gets great height in his league, great jumping reach, great extension in the air. In terms of coming for crosses this year in the Premier League, he's coming for the highest percentage of claimable crosses of any goalkeeper in the Premier League. His start position is really aggressive. He's always on his front foot. He will come as often as he can to help out his team. In terms of his handling under crossing is really good, both out in front of him and straight above his head. He's pretty flawless in his handling and under pressure. Obviously, he'll drop one or two because he's coming for so many. But in terms of his actual handling technique, it's really, really good. And his punching technique's not too bad either. He's especially good when he's punching straight on and will punch through. Slight flaw he can have from crosses is that he will occasionally really swing at the cross, especially when it's coming across his body, and you occasionally see him mistime that. But in terms of coming for crosses, really good. In terms of his shot stopping, this was one area I've had a couple of issues with judging, because we saw in his loans, he occasionally had issues with his shot stopping and his technique and his choice of shot stopping technique. But in the Premier League, that's been vastly improved. Got a really nice low diving saves. He gets his foot out of the way quickly, gets good distance, can do a positive and negative step save. So when he takes off his near foot or his back foot and gets his near foot out of the way, he can do all of those. Really good 1v1 as he comes off his line really quickly. Really fast keeper for 6'6", really good shape. Technically looks good, handling looks good, good skeep. There's not been too many flaws in his shot stopping in the Premier League. I noted one shot where he came out for a central 1v1 and got into a block, so didn't cover enough of the goal, was beaten. I noted a couple of times he's been beaten low at his near post from central shots, which may be a slight flaw. So I guess one of the issues I had when pricing Sanchez was, has his improvement come on so far that he is now at a level where he is potentially breaking into, say, a close to elite Premier League level, or is it just this small sample size? The great thing about him as well, for 6'6", and as part of these loans he's had at Rochdale and Forest Green that you mentioned, he's been allowed to make mistakes, and he's playing in teams that like to play out from the back. So his build-up from the back is genuinely really good. Got a nice long kicking technique. One flaw is that technique can break down under pressure occasionally. But when he has time, his technique, his mid-range passing is beautiful. His short passing is usually good. He can be a little bit sloppy. He can occasionally hit the wrong foot or take a bit of pace out. But when he's really paying attention, short-range passing is good. Good distributing from hands in terms of his throwing and his rolling technique as well. Could, in terms of 5 yards, see potentially him getting a couple of assists throughout his career, just resetting those counter-attacks. But yeah, so he's one he's priced at 22 million.
Yeah.
And that sort of reflects where I was on him. So I gave him a rating of 77, which is above average Premier League. And I think this is one whereby if I'd seen 15 more games, I might have put him a little bit higher. But because of not seeing that evidence of, is he going for a really good patch, or has he exploded into this keeper that his physicality and his ability at feet suggests he could be. So that price sort of reflects whereby I'm thinking he might go to a top six, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So if you think I've perhaps been a little bit harsh on him, he's one who could present value, I suppose.
I mean, the position that he finds himself in right now, I mean, the Spain call-up especially, having elevated his profile even further, even more so than his performances for Brighton, which, I mean, have not only been impressive for a young goalkeeper making their first appearances in the Premier League, but quite crucially for his team, have solved a problem which was being caused by Matt Ryan, who was having a poor season. So I love the idea of, how would you have approached this 3 months ago when he wasn't, starting for Brighton? It's one of those great 5 yards questions, because had he been on 5 yards at that point, presumably would have been not particularly high value. How could he have been without having shown what he's done in the last few months? And therefore, if you'd been able to get in front of that, then you'd be really, really excited to own him. As it is, even at 22 million, I mean, there'll be 10 goalkeepers on 5 yards more valuable than him, including Meslier of Leeds, who is 2 years younger than Sanchez, and he's priced up at 29 million. But then you've got basically the top keepers in the world. And what I've noticed is, looking at performance pay and filtering by goalkeepers on 5 yards, we should say not every goalkeeper in the world is on 5 yards yet. I'm sure one day we'll get there. But, there are probably going to be 5 or 6 or 7 keepers playing for the very top clubs, going deep in the Champions League, who will earn over £5 million in performance pay every season. So this is the question with Sanchez, which is so difficult to answer right now, but could be of interest to anyone listening. If you think in a year's time, Sanchez will have 50 Premier League appearances, he might have a cap for Spain, or he might just be around the squads, it would not be too much of a surprise to see him get a move to the very top clubs, just like so many other goalkeepers have in the past. In which case, if he is going to join a team challenging for the Premier League, going deep in the Champions League, that performance pay could get eaten into over the course of 5 years or so. So definitely a fascinating prospect, because as you say, and I should say for balance, in League One, he was known for some pretty eye-catching ricks as well. He made some bad errors, and it's always worth pointing out, as you have, when talking about goalkeepers, we like to have strong opinions about them, but realistically, we do have a small sample size. I'm not sure exactly how many games he's played for Brighton, but it's not enough to say definitively that those ricks, those mistakes have fully vanished. So a fascinating one to start with. We've got another one who's on loan from Newcastle at Swansea in the Championship. He's been really popular with Swans fans this season. Talk to me about Freddie Woodman, James.
Yeah, Freddie Woodman's a really interesting keeper. In 5 yards terms, you use like the shades of. So the keeper he most reminds me of is perhaps David Seaman. Mm-hmm. Not completely, but the thing that stood out for me, I read Seaman's biography as a child and when I was a keeper. And the thing that really stood out for me was he said he tries to make saves as simple as possible. And he just tries to do everything as simply as he possibly can. Now, Woodman is very much of that ilk. He's a bit of a throwback keeper. A lot of keepers now you'll see setting low with their hands by their side. Woodman still sets nice and high with his hands in like this very classic set position, the W position, ready to catch the ball. He makes his life as simple as possible. His positioning's generally really good. He makes good decisions in that when he can catch it, he'll catch it. If he has to push it, he'll push it and get really good distance on his saves. He'll sit deep and give him loads of time. He's really calm and composed. And this, judging keepers with data isn't always brilliant. And I was going off Y-Scout data and their XGC model, and there's issues with that in terms of it includes defensive clearances of the line, and the model's a little bit basic. But in 4 or 5 years, he's largely overperformed his shot-stopping data on that model. So that's a pretty good indication. And 2 of those are in the Championship as well as playing at a good level. He has been a consistently a very good keeper. He's especially good saving high, as you'd imagine, with his high hands, gets across his goal well high, good reactions, just like Sanchez, good in a positive and negative step dive, which is really important, means he can make lots of different types of saves. Probably not as good ball at feet as Sanchez is. He's got a really nice mid-range pass, but in terms of seeing him get to that top level, which personally I don't think he will get to, I think his ball at feet may hold him back in a couple of areas. Firstly, he predominantly supports safe side. So what I mean by that, he'll support ball side and also near post side and deep in his goal. So which really limits his options when playing out. And especially when he's receiving the ball from the right, he'll just play ball side a lot and he doesn't really switch play enough. And that's going to be a big deal for a top team. His short passing is generally good, but it can be a little bit sloppy and it lacks that zip. He doesn't really fizz it in. And like Sanchez, his long kicking technique's good. From feet and hands, he gets awesome distance, decent accuracy, but again, that breaks down the pressure. In terms of his protecting the space in front of defence, he sets relatively deep in his goal, but he is pretty secure when he comes to the ball. He'll come and gather the ball under pressure. He comes below average for a Championship goalkeeper, but I think a lot of that is just he's playing with 3 centre-backs. I actually think Woodman's biggest strength is organisation. So I was lucky enough to see Swansea play live in a ground without any fans this year. And he's so loud and he's constantly organising his team. And we've seen Swansea have a really good defensive record in the main this year. And I think his organisation has been a huge, huge part of that. Perhaps this is a bad time to be looking at him because he's probably going for his worst patch of the last two years currently. and it is showing up a couple of flaws in his game. Especially, he's not great saving low. So where he sets his hands high, he's not as good low as he is high. And he's not very good in close range 1v1s. So he won't come out and premeditate. He won't close the space. Where his reactions are really good, he's over reliant on them. Sets too high, so he makes those saves really, really difficult for him. And the last issue he has, and we've seen this a couple of times, he tends to overcompensate towards his near post on angled shots. So his positioning can be slightly out. I project him being, well, he is currently a very, very good championship keeper. I think there's probably 3 keepers in Begovic, Krul and Dieng who have been the best keepers in the championship this year and a little bit ahead. And he's top of that next bracket for me in terms of he's a very, very good championship keeper. I think he will be an elite championship, potentially will be a bottom half Premier League keeper, but I wouldn't nail that down. I'm not sure if he'll be Championship, Premier League. There might be an opening at Newcastle next season if they're still in the Premier League. They've been flipping between keepers a bit. Will they give him a chance? Not 100% sure, because their 2 keepers are pretty good, and I wouldn't say he's necessarily any better than Darlow, and I definitely wouldn't say he's a better keeper than Dubravka.
Well, I guess it's one of those where I'm trying to work out as you talk whether it would be beneficial for him personally if Newcastle did get relegated this season. And then you'd think, with those 2 keepers, well, certainly Dubravka will be on Premier League wages. It's hard to project other goalkeepers' wages, but, it wouldn't be a surprise to see Dubravka leave. Darlow might stick around. I'm not sure if there'd be much of a market for him in the Premier League, but it might be that with a relegation, Newcastle would say, okay, let's use this opportunity to make Woodman our number 1, someone we know can do it at this level because he has done for the best part of 2 seasons. But even if that does happen, it's not great in 5 yards terms. The Championship performance pay, while it is there, is dwarfed by Premier League performance pay. And so, you might be looking at a Premier League debut for Woodman in the best case scenario. It could be, if Newcastle get relegated, at age 26 odd, 25, 26, which maybe isn't ideal. It's an interesting one in terms of pathway for those reasons. And I note that Dean Henderson, who we're going to talk about in a second, they're actually only a week apart in terms of age. It feels like Henderson is clearly 1 or 2 steps ahead of Woodman at the moment, which, might only be an issue in terms of England, but certainly if, in 5 yards terms, if you're buying a keeper to add to your squad, you probably want to be certain that they're going to be playing towards the top end of a top division somewhere. And it feels like we can't necessarily say that about Woodman at this point. Although his godfather is Gareth Southgate, the England manager, which can't hurt. It's interesting you say you read David Seaman's autobiography, because Gareth Southgate, a long time ago when he was certainly not as high profile as he is now, wrote a book with Freddie Woodman's dad, who's called Andy Woodman. He was a goalkeeper, Football League stalwart, and they wrote a brilliant book which I read when I was much younger and very much enjoyed. So there's a little book recommendation for the listeners. He's on at 12 million, Woodman. So look, it's interesting. I dare say there might be some Swansea fans who, might think to themselves, well, we think he's a bit better than what James has said there. We think that if we go up, there could be a chance to get him permanently, and that could change everything. So certainly one to think about. Let's move on to another EFL keeper on loan, and his name is Josh Griffiths. And he's in League Two at the moment, playing for Cheltenham Town. He's on loan from West Bromwich Albion, and he is just been called up to the England under-21 squad for the Euros, although he'll be the 3rd choice, I'm pretty sure. 19 years old and making his first steps in the professional game. What's caught our eye, what's caught Adi Boothroyd's eye when it comes to Josh Griffiths?
Yeah, no, as you say, on loan at West Brom. Probably currently, before his England 21 call-up, most famous for being the keeper who conceded the world record goal at Newport.
Oh, yeah.
And that probably flags what is perhaps his biggest flaw in his game. So obviously, 19 years old, he has a lot of time on his side. We have seen goalkeepers go from League Two to an elite level fairly recently. I'm thinking of the likes of Dean Henderson, Joe Hart, Nick Pope. There's probably a couple of others who I've missed there who have played at that level recently and at a similar age and kicked on. But yeah, in terms is currently for me the area he needs to most improve, as I was touching on there, is in terms of his judgment of high balls. So from crosses especially, he sets quite deep in his goal. He's not the most positive in his goal. Although he's really safe in his handling, his punching technique is poor. He tends to punch the ball down. He tends to take a really big swing at it and not time it particularly well. And he gets caught a lot underneath the high ball, and I think that's a judgment issue. You saw that for the world record goal, which perhaps is a freak goal. It does bounce really high, but perhaps speaks a little bit towards that as well. But often he gets caught underneath the ball from crosses, and one of his big issues is, while he's good taking the ball out in front of him, you need a slightly different technique when the ball's above him, where you catch it right above your head, and he doesn't do that. He still tries to take it out in front of him. So he sort of compounds that issue there. His big strength for me is his distribution, and that's perhaps no surprise coming from a Premier League academy as it is now, or Championship Premier League academy in West Brom. He's very good ball at feet, especially so considering he's been playing on really, really poor pitches, which probably is no bad thing for his long-term development in League Two. He's got a nice first touch. His mid-range passing is beautiful, really nice to control for the receiver. Really nice kicking technique. Can play short with both feet, and you can see it's been drilled into him. He always hits the receiver's back foot. I spoke about Sanchez being really good, but sometimes sloppy. Griffiths, even at his young age, puts everything into his passes. Could maybe hit them with a bit more pace, but he's really cool and calm under pressure. Gets really good distance from hands as well. And he's also really good shot stopper. He sets quite low. He's down as 6'1". Although looking at him, I think he's a little bit taller. I know you've had a bit of discussion on a different podcast, Ali, about player heights. I think he's another one where he's a bit taller than he's set there. He sets quite low, but quite balanced as well. He's superb going down low. He gets down really well, gets his foot out the way. He's really good close range and mid range 1v1s. He's got a really nice blocking shape and spread shape, and can be really effective in that. Gets good distances in his dives, good reactions. He's got quick feet. He does have a couple of issues in terms of his shot stopping. Number one, I spoke about, say, Woodman's decision making post shot. Griffiths has conceded a lot of goals from rebounds, and some of it's bad luck, but a lot of this comes down. He pushes the ball a lot into the danger zone. I'm thinking at an elite level, Lloris is someone with this problem where he doesn't really make decisions with his saves and just pushes them into bad areas. Griffiths done that a lot, and that really stood out watching him, how many goals he's conceded from rebounds. And he's not the best long-range 1v1 keeper. He doesn't control the situation very well. He arrives too early. He can drop down in his shape too early, and it does leave him to being rounded by attackers. It's not been a huge issue for him in League Two, actually. He's actually made some good saves in those scenarios, but it's one of those things I think he needs to work on it in terms of when he comes up against better attackers. I've got him down at 8 million. I've got him down. I think next year he's going to probably get a League One loan. Yep. And I think the year after he'll probably end up in the Championship. I can't see him breaking through at West Brom, not only because they have Sam Johnston, but they also have Palmer out on loan at Lincoln. And I think long-term Palmer is a better prospect than Griffiths is, if nothing else, because he's just a more complete keeper, rounded keeper, really athletic, powerful and big keeper. I think long-term he's West Brom number one. So picking exactly where Griffiths is going to finish, I've kind of got him pegged as being a good Championship keeper long term. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of reflected in his price. He was quite a hard keeper to price. So I guess if people are looking at him and thinking, he's in the under-21s at 19 years old, he's going to be a Premier League keeper, he's an absolute bargain. But there's also lots of examples of keepers playing in the under-21s and finishing at about League One Championship level. And I think there's a chance that will be Griffiths' level as well long term.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that basically every single England keeper at the moment has played in League Two when they were younger, just like Griffiths is. So in a sense, you think to yourself, okay, well, there can be no snobbery about where he's playing age 19, because for goalkeepers, pathways are very, very different, and actually game time matters, maybe more so than the level that you're playing at. But you are a Peterborough United fan, and I can't help but remember that you had a goalkeeper called Joe Lewis, who, as far as I remember, got called up to an England squad, possibly as a late backup, when you had been playing in League Two, when he'd been playing in League Two and winning promotion that year with Posh. I mean, what happened there? Can you tell me what happened there? Like, what was he doing that was so amazing at that stage?
Yeah, so Lewis came to Posh from Norwich, and I think it's about 400,000 they spent to get him at. I don't remember the exact age, but yeah, I think he's about 20 years old. I think he's currently at Aberdeen now, I think, and doing pretty well. I think he's doing really well there. I think Lewis was a really big keeper, large keeper, perhaps lacked the athleticism of an elite level keeper, never quite developed that athleticism. Was a solid keeper at Posh, but he made, I think what was his downfall at Posh at the end is he made a lot of mistakes. His consistency was just never there. But again, Lewis is probably one. If you were pricing him up when he made that 400k move to Posh and got off to a good start, you'd have probably been pricing him at a similar price to Griffiths with that potential to maybe kick on. I think he played up front at one point for the England under-21s. So might have that wrong as a sub, but was in the under-21 squad. Got that senior call up, but now wouldn't have earned very much performance pay in his career, having been Championship SPL level for his career. So
wow,
so
yeah, that's what we need to be bearing in mind with these goalkeepers. I'm trying to stick up for them, but it's so rare that they explode up a few divisions quickly, and we really do want our keepers that we add to our squads to be playing at the very, very top, I think, most likely. But last but not least, we're going to talk about a club, basically, with a big decision to make when it comes to goalkeepers. Manchester United have David De Gea and Dean Henderson on their books. Henderson is already on 5 yards at 34 million. He's obviously 24 years old and has a fascinating decade in front of him. David De Gea is going up this week, and he's going up at 25 million, so 9 million less than Henderson. He's obviously hitting 30, and he's got a real contender for the gloves. James, just before we let you go, talk me through Henderson versus De Gea and how you went about pricing up De Gea. I mean, Henderson has played the last 3 Premier League games, 6 in total for United this season. Certainly knocking on the door.
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting debate, and in terms of 5 yards and who you invest in, if you get this decision right, there's potential to make of a big upside. There's probably more of an upside in Henderson, because the big question here is, how do Man U see this situation developing? So I didn't price De Gea, that was Josh who priced De Gea. But we did have a conversation about who do we see being Man U number 1 next season. And for me, in terms of current ability or in terms of level of performances, I personally believe at present Dean Henderson's playing at a higher level than De Gea. I think when you judge keepers, you judge them over perhaps 4 different spheres. So how well they protect the space, that will be sweeping and crossing. And in that regard, I think Henderson is not brilliant. He's good, but he is definitely ahead of De Gea. I think we saw when De Gea first came to this country or came to the Premier League, he was really shaky from crosses, and although his handling's good, I think that's influenced him long term, and he very rarely comes to deal with crosses. And when he does come, he tends to come in safe situations. So if you look at his success rate from crosses, it's really, really high. But that's because he rarely comes under pressure. Whereas Henderson will be a lot more positive from crosses and will come under pressure for balls. I do think Henderson has a couple of flaws from crosses though. For starters, he does have a habit of sometimes setting too far to his near post. So he can get caught underneath the ball a little bit. So that's definitely something to work on. The other thing, and he doesn't track the ball from crosses particularly well. So a vital part from crosses is how you see the ball and you see the picture around you. I think the goal, which has probably been one of the most talked about goals on Twitter in a long time, you can see it against AC Milan, is a really good point of this. So when we think about his shot stopping, everyone was focusing on his big arm swing that he does for basically every single shot. Now, for me, I think Henderson's big issue from crosses is he's a really poor shot stopper from headers. Especially from corners. He sets completely front on to the corner. So if you're dealing with a corner, you want to be slightly open at about 30 or so degrees. He sets really close to that corner, so he doesn't have that peripheral vision. So we saw when that goal came in against Milan, he didn't track the runner at all. So he looked about 4 seconds before the cross came in, but then had no idea of the picture. And I think building these pictures from crosses is something he does struggle with. So then when the header came in, his eyes are actually watching and going the other way, and then he has to readjust for the header and then reacts too late and ends up falling back. Combine that with his low set position and arm swing, that's a pretty big flaw in his game. In terms of his overall shot stopping, though, he is a really good shot stopper, as is David De Gea. De Gea probably more capable of that spectacular save. He's superb at getting into that top corner. Really athletic keeper, has got a really big reach on him. Issue with De Gea currently is that he's making a lot more mistakes than he was at the start of his Man U career. At the start of his Man U career, he was a really elite level shot stopper who didn't come off his line very much. For the past 12 months, he's probably been an average Premier League shot stopper on the whole, if you factor in his mistakes and also his elite saves, who doesn't come off his line very much, which is at Man U probably not good enough. Dean Henderson is a very good shot stopper as well. He sets with his feet wide, so like De Gea, he's quite good at making saves low with his feet, but he also compensates. He's got this technique I've never really seen before, where to stop him getting nutmegged with his wide feet, he sort of drops his knee down into like a K save position, like saves it with his knee. Really interesting technique, really good reactions, close range 1v1s. Henderson's superb shot stopper. He gets so tight to the ball and gets in such good shape. It's really hard to beat him. His flaw though is that when he on his long range 1v1s, he can panic and he can come too far off his line and get caught in bad positions and sometimes go in a shape. And I'm kind of thinking you've got to think about the sorts of shots he's going to be facing. And Man U aside, you're probably going to concede quite a few crosses into the box, and is his inability to save. I think if you got the stats which aren't openly available, his save percentage from headers compared to expected save would be lower than you'd expect. But also, Man U over the next 10 years, they're probably going to be playing a high line in a lot of those 10 years if he's number one. Is his inability to deal with long range 1v1s as it currently stands going to be a huge hindrance to him? In terms of their distribution, I think De Gea is probably slightly ahead of Henderson. I think both of them support play quite well, will support high and deep. Henderson, that was a big question when he went to Man U. He's not elite at that by any stretch of the imagination, but he's pretty good. His first touch is okay. He's fairly comfortable playing with both feet. He hits a nice mid-range pass. He usually hits the back foot and he generally plays with a good weight, although it's not perfect. Kind of like crossing, his biggest weakness distribution-wise, and we saw it with the goal he conceded against Sheffield United, is he doesn't have that awareness. He doesn't build those pictures early, so he's quite slow in his distribution. Although he does have an incredible overarm throw, and when he catches those crosses, and he can distribute really well. De Gea is probably the better keeper in terms of he plays quicker. He'll play a few more adventurous passes. He'll switch play more, and he's probably a better long passer as well. His long kicking technique's really good. So I guess the question is, if De Gea leaves, where does he go? Now, this is a huge sticking point, right? Because he's on really large wages. Who's going to sign him? I can really only see him going to PSG. I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts on this, Ali, but teams that are going to pay his wages, Navas is 34, 35 in, I think it's November or December. That's basically the only location. And I don't think you can have them both at the club next year. So I think Henderson is the better option. I don't know if he's a 10-year keeper for Man U, but I think he's one they'll stick with for 2 or 3 years. But then on the flip side, if De Gea goes to PSG, all of a sudden he could be earning quite a lot of performance pay over there as well. So you could potentially have a couple of decent buys.
A real head scratcher. Something's got to give, it feels like, doesn't it? Well, I've thought about it, and I think we can consider yourself something of an expert on the art form of goalkeeping. I actually think if we were allowed to play football right now, if I played in goal tonight in my six-a-side team, I would actually be a net positive rather than the normal net negative. So thank you, James, for your time. Next up, George is going to finish us off by talking about an absolute starlet who plays for Aston Villa. Thank you so much to James for providing the insight and expertise on the ugly ducklings of 5 yards in some sense, the poor goalkeepers that don't get goal performance pay, don't get assist performance pay, but as James said, can be very, very interesting prospects to add to your squad nonetheless. George, you're moving away from those that stand in the net, but you've got plenty to say about another talented player.
It's often fairly easy for me and you, Ali, doing 5x5, because we can talk about EFL players who we already know quite a lot about. There's not much research, but given that we were palming off 4 of the players we're talking about on the show to somebody else, I thought I would at least take on a bit of the responsibility to talk about someone of interest. And I looked at who the most bought player, if you look on the 5 Yards homepage, it says who the most bought player of the week is. And top of the list at the time of recording is an Aston Villa 17-year-old by the name of Karnichukwuemeka. Now, you and I know a fair bit about Carney's brother Caleb, who plays for Northampton, who is very highly thought of there and scored 1 or 2 senior goals this season. He's out of the side at the moment. But Carney seems to be the one who is attracting a lot of interest. He's been linked already to Bayern Munich. He's been linked to Juventus as well. And he's up on 5 Yards at 13 million. And I must say, if this is the way that you want to play 5 Yards, if you're happy to invest in players who are yet to set foot on the pitch in professional football, then Karnichukwuemeka would make sense at 13 million, because wow, he is really quite something. He's kind of, I think, 6'2", 6'3", very tall and leggy, but has that ability. And I know that it's quite a lazy comparison to make, given that he's a silky youth teamer coming through at Aston Villa. But if he doesn't rate Jack Grealish, then I am. Even though they're so different physically, they couldn't be much more different in terms of the way they look and the way that they're built. Grealish, that stocky, low centre of gravity player who buzzes off that, whereas Chukwuemeka is languid and tall, moves through the pitch in the way that Yaya Toure often used to do, where he dribbles as if he's moving so slowly, but just covering so much ground. He's quite one-footed. He's very much a player who has the ball stuck to his right foot, but it's just the way that he collects the ball and can spin out of tight spaces. His progressive passing as well. It reminds me so much of Grealish, where you're watching a guy who's doing so much, but at the same time looks almost like he's playing in slow motion. He's in absolutely no hurry at all to do anything. When he gets the ball, he's happy to hold on to it, take as many touches as he wants to spin a man. But even so, you'll suddenly realise he's progressed 10, 15 yards up the pitch. And the player that was initially on his back when he first span him is now 10 yards behind him. It's amazing how he does it. These YouTube compilations, you've got to be a bit careful of course. I always think people who judge a player too much off the back of them, you need to be able to watch the guy throughout a whole game in order to understand more about the player that he is, and when he's not necessarily impacting games, what he's doing wrong, or when he does get the ball and doesn't go to plan. But you can see the stylistic comparisons there. And there's one scout report already up 4 days ago from Ian Rosie, who has said that he thinks Chukwuemeka's level now is 65, which would make him a championship player, and his potential level is 85, which is a Champions League player. Now, I think that's. He says a strong buy. I don't see why, when you're taking a 16-year-old with the raw technical talents that Chukwuemeka has, I don't see why 85 has to be a ceiling at the moment. You look at someone like Grealish, who's, I would say, is well surpassed. Even though he hasn't played in the Champions League yet, his level as a footballer is well surpassed 85 now. So, I'm excited by him, and it's just interesting to, it's not the way that I've played the game myself so far. I'm in no sense an expert when it comes to players playing in academies who haven't made the step up yet. But it's hard to see why Chukwuemeka wouldn't get a chance fairly soon, and with big European clubs already circling. You can treat it like a bet. If he doesn't make the progression, if you buy him at 13 million, he's probably going to end up being worth next to nothing in a couple of years' time, in which case you've done the whole 13. But there's massive upside.
It's really interesting with Premier League academy players like this, because the scout report that you referred to had his current level as a championship footballer, and that is almost impossible to know really at this stage. Of course, that's what 5 Yards is all about, is having an opinion, backing your opinion, and having an eye for a player, of course. But the fascinating thing for me is I was almost a bit defensive there. Like, you can't just assume that someone's at a championship level when they haven't been able to prove that, when they've only been playing against players of an age group rather than all players. And yet we have seen a number of Premier League loanees in the last few years take their first steps in the game in the Championship and look very, very comfortable, and by the end of a first season look like some of the stars of the league. So I'm absolutely not saying that that's not true, but it's a bold call, isn't it? It certainly makes me want to go and watch some of these R&B tracked compilations. and yeah, a nice wrinkle as well, as you say, with his brother who plays for Northampton, not currently on 5 yards, maybe one for the player request function. But no, very excited about Karnichukwuemeka. Good from you.
Well,
There are
and his brother Karni.
Oh yeah, and his brother Karni. Sorry, you've spoken about Karni. Maybe in a future episode
You're excited about Caleb.
Maybe in a future episode we'll tackle Caleb. It's been such a treat to talk about goalkeepers this week with James Mayley. Of course, there are a lot of keepers in this week's batch of player uploads. De Gea, Woodman, Robert Sanchez, Nick Pope. We spoke about them earlier, but there are a ton of other players as well. As ever with these uploads, just shows the brilliant variety of 5 yards and of talent across the world, because there's something for everyone for sure. The likes of Andreas Christensen currently starting for Chelsea and looking every bit the player that we hoped he'd be a few years ago. You've got the likes of Granit Xhaka going up on 5 yards this week. Kyle Walker as well, of more established players. But as ever, a ton of young, raw talent with plenty of upside, but with plenty of question marks over them as well. Nathan Teller of Southampton, for example. But in the EFL, Kyle Joseph of Wigan, Dylan Bahambula in League Two, who's really caught the eye in flashes this season as well. So make sure you're locked to the 5 yards Twitter account for the full list of player uploads. Remember that the transfer windows are more frequent than they have been in previous weeks. They are now open almost every day, Tuesday to Friday, 9 till 8 p.m. 9 a.m. that is, till 8 p.m. And on Saturday mornings as well, 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. if you want to make any additions to your squad ahead of the weekend action. Make sure that you're scouting players as well. We got great prizes for those who come in the places in the top 10 of our Scout of the Month competition. Go to 5yards.co.uk to check out how you can get involved in the scouting side of it. You can win 5 yards currency to use on building your squad, which I think is pretty tasty to all listening. But thanks to James, thanks to George, and thank you to you for listening, for watching us this week. Do get in touch in the comments on YouTube or send a tweet to the 5 yards account. Any questions for us to tackle next week on 5x5. We are open to any questions about 5 yards and, of course, about any players. We love doing this and we hope you enjoy it too. So make sure you subscribe and we'll talk again next week.